So ladies and gentlemen, our topic of discussion for today is going to be Great Minds from Bengal, Tagore, Swami Vivekananda, Shri Aurobindo. Moderated by Makarand Paranjpe. I would like to please call him on stage. Makarand R. Paranjpe is Director, Indian Institute of Advanced Study, Shimla. Author of 20 and editor of another 24 books, he has also published over 175 academic papers and hundreds of popular articles. I would like to now call on stage Hindol Sengupta. Hindol Sengupta is the multiple award-winning author of the 9 best-selling books of non-fiction and fiction. His book, Being Hindu, became the first book on Hinduism in 70 years to win the Wilbur Award given by the Regional Communicators Council of America in 2018. I would now like to call on stage Sounak Chattopadhyay. Sounak is a leading vocalist of the present generation and has made a place for himself in the hearts of many classical and Bengali art music lovers. Other than traditional stage performances, he has also emerged as a very successful ideator and scriptwriter for composite programs. I would now request our moderator, Mr. Makarand Paranjpe, to please take forward the session, and also to keep in mind that we have 45 minutes of the session and the question and answers round. Thank you so very much. Please enjoy the session.
Thank you so much, and thank you for coming. I'm sorry that two of our very distinguished panelists can't be with us today for a variety of reasons. Mr. Shopan Dasgupta has taken ill and is in the hospital. We wish him a speedy and complete recovery. And a couple of other panelists couldn't make it. So I'm sorry that we have started a little late, but thank you for coming. And I want to begin by asking both of you a question, which is that Bengal was at the forefront of Indian intellectual life, cultural life, political life during our freedom struggle. What has happened to Bengal today? Hindol?
So I think I am part of the second generation of people who fled Bengal, and I use the word fled with care because that's exactly what happened. You see, what happened in Bengal was, as you of course remember, Bengal's great strength was that it was able to marry, quite like in a Florentine sort of way, enterprise and culture. People forget, especially in India, and of course it's forgotten in Bengal, that culture doesn't evolve on its own. It's not a miracle sprouting from the ground. It needs resources. And usually those resources come from a place where enterprise is flourishing. The same was, of course, true in Europe during the Renaissance. The same was true in Bengal. So the Bengal Renaissance, or what is today called the Bengal Renaissance, really sprouted on the back of the entrepreneurial strengths of people like Dwarkanath Tagore, for instance, right? Now, all of that entrepreneurial spirit of Bengal first was hit when the capital moved, of course, to Delhi. That was one. But it still went on with great strength for a while. But after independence, and especially with the coming of communist rule in Bengal, that spirit was broken step by step. The companies all fled from Bengal. The enterprise all fled from Bengal. There were no jobs. Then, of course, the great Naxal revolt broke the back of... And remember, I mean, today people forget, actually the Naxal period, who were the Naxals? Who were these people? They were some of the brightest talents of Bengal. They were some of the most intelligent, most erudite people, which is why some of them who escaped after becoming an Naxal went on to do great things in academia. Now, this entire sucking away of energies broke Bengal's back, and we have never recovered.
Thank you. Sounak, I wanted to ask you, I mean, Hindol talked about this brain drain and escape from Bengal, as he said. And it's absolutely true. You go anywhere in the world, there's you might say, a kind of fascinating migration of Bengali talent, all the way to Los Angeles or San Francisco, on the west coast of America, and all the way to Sydney, the top academics, etc., you'll find are from Bengal. So this export of talent, but you're one of those who stayed back. So do you think the parochialism of current day Bengal is something to be really, saddened about? How do you deal with it?
You're asking difficult sociological questions to a musician, so I'm not sure if I'm competent to answer this. Um, this has had, as far as I'm concerned, as far as the perspective of a musician or a performer is concerned, this has had a kind of a different good impact as well. Incidentally, the two cities you mentioned, LA and Sydney, we have countless Bengalis over there who, in their own way, are sowing the seeds of a Bengali culture there anew. And it's been a privilege for me, and I'm sure there are hundreds like me, to visit both of these cities to perform.
Because of the diaspora.
So, because of the diaspora.
But my question is, do you feel a constriction of the spirit of Bengal being a resident of Kolkata, or you feel perfectly happy that with the way things are? That was my more specific question.
No, I don't think I feel perfectly happy because the so-called Bengaliness of Bengalis has partly been taken for granted by us. We are happy that we have inherited a heritage, we have inherited a culture, and sit back home doing nothing about it. We don't spend the time and energy we need to maybe indulge and plunge the depths of seers and philosophers like maybe Tagore or Swamiji or whoever. What Hindol said about the enterprise factor, that is of course true. So we basically are sitting back and relaxing and doing nothing about it. Most of us, maybe, that's what we are doing, and taken for granted the fact that what India thinks today, Bengal thinks today, India thinks tomorrow, that kind of a notion.
The slip of the tongue indicates something.
Does
you
it?
know. It's
Freudian
a Freud,
slip, yeah.
because earlier what Bengal thinks today, India thinks tomorrow. Now it's the opposite. But we'll come back. We'll come back to this deeper question about what happened in and to Bengal. But we are supposed to talk about three great, not just intellectuals or thought leaders or cultural leaders, but really three great makers of modern India. Tagore, Vivekananda, and Aurobindo. And I'll ask you, Hindol, you wrote a fantastic book on the modern monk. I want you to tell us, what was the one thing of Swamiji? Because, we don't have that much time and we want to throw it open to you guys. We can talk about each one of these figures for days on end because they're so complex and their lives are so rich and their intellectual trajectories so adventurous and fascinating. So we have to kind of get into the gist business, right? So please tell us, like, if you were to sum up or single out one thing about Swamiji, which is still important to all of us in this audience today and people outside, what would that be? That one thing about him which both attracts and moves and inspires us today.
So I think nationalism, as you know, has got a bad word, at least in some circles. What is forgotten, though, that Indian nationalism had at its core a certain spiritual idea which did not in fact begin with Gandhiji. Today we say that Gandhiji was in a sense of the freedom movement, the spiritual core, but he was not the first. He was in a sense carrying forward the legacy of people like Swami Vivekananda. Right? It is people like Vivekananda who really began an exploration, and you yourself have written beautifully about Vivekananda and his explorations, including internationalism, Makarand. He, in a sense, began that journey of spirituality.
Spiritualizing politics.
Spiritualizing politics and bringing that even in revolution. Now, whenever we talk about revolution, what kind of revolution do we want? That question is never asked. Is only one kind of revolution the only kind of revolution we can think of? And I would argue no. Somebody like Swami Vivekananda showed the path that nationalism or revolution could have a very deep spiritual and philosophical underpinning.
Absolutely. In fact, you yourself talked about Naxalbari and the communist takeover of the Bengali intelligentsia. And in a way, Swamiji had already offered a different revolutionary path, which did not result in, the breakdown of social and civic values, nor of the fleeing of enterprise. And it was as much an inner revolution as a social transformation. But I'll come back to you.
I just want to add
please.
one sentence, if you don't mind. On taking off from a sentence that you just said, inner revolution. And I do think this is one thing that is completely misunderstood. The last person who understood this was Mahatma Gandhi. After Gandhi, we have never really understood that revolution must first begin at home. And when we say home, it means our physical self, inside ourselves, so to speak.
Absolutely. I think it's a biochemistry that needs to be changed because spirituality is not a bunch of mumbo jumbo. It's actually hardwired. But I think that you said it, Hindol, that I think Swamiji showed us inner revolution and outer evolution. But the communists inverted it and created so much destruction and violence all over the world because they put outer revolution first and they didn't even talk about inner evolution, you see. It's all material, absolutely. So, coming to you, Shaunak, I mean, obviously you're a great singer and you do classical music, but you also do Rabindra Sangeet, right? And it's interesting how we started with Swamiji, who was born between these two people, 1864. Before him comes Tagore, 1844, and then 1861, 61 to 41. 1941. And then you have Sri Aurobindo, 1872. So, I mean, it's good that we started with Swamiji, who's an interesting connecting figure. But I don't know if you know that Tagore and he didn't get along very well. That's a different matter. But, you know, I want you to talk to us a little bit about how you're inspired by Gurudev, who was such a multifaceted person. And since you're a singer, rather than straining your brain, perhaps you can render a couplet or, you know, a poem or, you know, I love that song, Aha Tomar Sange Praner Ke. Can you just sing a little bit and tell us?
Aha tomar sange praner khela priyo amar ogo priyo বড় তলা আজ পরাণ আমার খেলাতে হার মানবে কি Thank you for requesting this song.
That was lovely. You know, as the Bengali say, Khali Gola, you know, without any accompaniments. How beautiful.
This is just the right ambience to sing in Khali Gola.
Yeah, I
Khuli
know.
awaaz mein.
That's lovely.
It was so moving. I was going to say that, referring to another story of Tagore, Kshudit Pashan. I mean, if you sing like this, the stones will rise up and be animated with life.
But we have not done enough about Tagore's music. In fact, again, what both you and Hindolda were saying, Rabindranath had also emphasized most of Rabindranath's music, his poetry, is very transcendental, in fact. And there again, at least our generation of Bengalis have mostly failed because we look at Rabindranath's music, we again take it for granted. We have been bequeathed this tradition by birth, and we just look at it on the surface. Nice tunes, nice beats, a lot of fusion stuff going along with it, which is fine in a way. But then we do not generally care to plunge the depths of the philosophies that they portray or that they convey. So,
I completely agree. In fact, I don't want to interject, but there's a very important point here. Because when we talk about the disagreement between Tagore and Swamiji, one of the bases or the roots of that was the nature of spirituality itself. Because what Tagore didn't like was what he thought was the Ramakrishna mission type of Mayavadi, life-denying kind of mysticism where Atma was the only reality, the world wasn't real, you were transcending the world. Whereas for him, Tagore said, I'm going to stare at this world till the light in my eyes dies out. because I see you, the glory of God, only through this creation. So it's a completely different kind of spirituality. But I wanted to just ask you very briefly about something that you just said, which is we don't understand Tagore. I couldn't agree more with you, nor do we understand Swamiji for that matter. And one of the reasons we don't understand Tagore is, see, when you sang, I mean, I was deeply moved, as I said, but that deeply moving experience also had a great cleansing and intellectual component, which is what Tagore believed, aesthetic education. Now, you look at the ugliness, the violence, the crassness all around us, the outraging on social media. What it really lacks is any sense of refinement. And Tagore believed that ideology was going to kill the spirit. And today we've got so ideologized, you know, in every sphere of our lives, including higher education, that I think when you said we don't understand Tagore, what it means is that unless you feel deeply, unless your aesthetic sensibilities are refined and developed, you're going to be an incomplete human being. And this is what we are forgetting today.
One interesting thing Rabindranath said about the listeners in general, the listeners or the audience of his music and in general. We know it takes a lot of dedication, it takes a lot of sadhana for a performer to go up on stage and do something. But it also takes a lot of practice and sadhana for the listener. This audience cannot just sit back and expect the performer to come to his or her level and dish out things according to his or her preference. The audience also needs to intellectually educate themselves and reach out.
Well put. You see, we live in a world of consumerism and instant nirvana, if not instant gratification. But in our tradition, the saharodaya is very important, that the viewer, you know, the listener, members of the audience must be as well trained, as developed as the singer. In fact, we were having a conversation about this in Jaipur, and somebody said, what's happening to poetry? Because nobody can understand good poetry, we have to make it popular. And then someone else said, look, are you going to make Homer and Dante and Mahabharata and Ramayana popular by dumbing it down? It's we who have to raise ourselves. Absolutely. So I think what you said is very profound in the sense that you can't expect, you know, the audience to be instantly taken or transported to another realm just by the prowess of the singer, who should do sadhana in isolation, and the audience can, you know, have their peanuts and do SMS, you know, while listening. But now we come, in a sense, to the most complicated or interesting of, well, they're all complicated and interesting, but in some ways the most difficult to fathom of the three figures, which is Aurobindo, who begins as a, you know, revolutionary. He doesn't know, before that he doesn't know a single Indian language, you know, raised in Loreto and then sent off to England when he's very young. His father, Krishnadan Ghosh, didn't want him to come in contact with anything Indian, which he thought was contaminating. And then he becomes a yogi. 1910, he leaves Bengal from Chandranagar, goes to Pondicherry, starts practicing yoga, and then writes an epic of 16, you know, 1,000, line, which is one of the longest poems in the history of the English language. It's about 10 times as long as Homer. You know, it's a huge epic he wrote called Savitri, which nobody can read, in the sense they find it unreadable. But my question is to you, Hindol, that do you know that he felt that Swamiji was his guru? And in Alipur jail, in his evening talks with Nirod Baran, he said that he saw Swamiji, he saw him as an emanation, and he unveiled to Aurobindo the layers above the mind, and the entire ladder of consciousness was revealed by Swamiji, who was dead by then, to Aurobindo, because when he was in jail, 1908, and Swamiji had passed away in 1902. So what do you think about this non-material transmission of knowledge? Is it possible?
No, absolutely, it is possible, and it is not only possible, it is entirely, we have seen this again and again, of course. There is another journey in this entire incident that you spoke about, which really made me think. you know, if you think about, since we're talking about Bengal, there are many people like this who have moved away as Bengalis from anything to do with Indian. You know, Michael Madhusudhan Dotto comes into mind, right? So many people who have shed, and you know, I began by saying I'm the second generation of Bengalis who fled. We also, in a sense,
Shed and fled.
shed and fled, right? Only to return, right? And that journey back home for Bengalis is extremely powerful and poignant. In fact, even Swami Vivekananda, if you remember, when he first meets Thakur, you know, Ramakrishna Paramhans, he has already asked Keshav Chandra Sen, "Apni Bhagavan dekhechen, you know, have you seen God?" Right? And then all Keshav Chandra Sen is able to, sorry, Devendranath Tagore, not Keshav Chandra Sen. All Devendranath Tagore is able to say to him was, "You have the eyes of a yogi, you know, tumhar yogi chok, you know." And that seeking the answers, that theme continues in Aurobindo's life too. That even though you are sent away and you shed and you flee and so on and so forth, something brings you back. The journey back home is inevitable.
Loss and recovery of self.
So the Bengali, I want to put to you, Makarand, is India's eternal prodigal race. There is no greater prodigal race in India than the Bengalis. Because remember, Bengali culture is relatively far more new in that sense, right? The Tamils have a far longer history, as do the Marathis, as do the Gujaratis, and so on and so forth. Bengali culture and Bengali language and tradition in that sense is far more contemporary. It's a modern thing, right? And it was created in a modern milieu, so to speak. That's why many Bengali artists were able to, in a sense, talk about things in a language and verb that perhaps others could not at that time. But that also meant that for Bengalis, the connection to the past is always an extremely fragile and tenuous thing. And especially because their homeland is consistently violated, that eternal sense of being a prodigal is extremely strong within the Bengalis.
See, I mean, this is such a fascinating topic. I said we'll return to what happened to Bengal and in Bengal and then throw it open. You know, I think that the pre-colonial history of Bengal has to be studied more. Especially, you know, even in literature, the Padavalis, the Chaitanya-related literature, and prior to that, some of the Buddhist literature, because there was something very beautifully homely as well as innocent about pre-colonial Bengal, which is captured if you read, the lives of Sri Ramakrishna and Sharada Ma, and the anecdotes around them, that the native culture of Bengal had a sweetness and a simplicity of the folk, which embourgeoisement, which happened under the British, took away. But one little fascinating anecdote to link back to Tagore. When Sri Aurobindo went into isolation from 1920 practically till his passing in 1950, he saw nobody. He only saw 4 people. And one of the people he saw, or allowed others to see, was Tagore. And Tagore wrote a poem on him and said, "I have seen the golden Purusha." Because Sri Aurobindo talked not about the past, but about the future, about supramentalization. Because his main point was that human beings had reached a point where there was a crisis of conscience, a crisis of intellect, and also a crisis of capabilities, that our problems had overshot, our capacity to solve them. And only a consciousness revolution which was global, non-parochial, so it was not about Bengal or India, it was about the human condition itself, could take us out of our present quagmire. But having said that, I'm going to throw it open now to the audience. Can anybody tell us how much time we have? Wonderful. We have 22 minutes left, or we've finished 22 minutes. Is it winding down? Great. So we'll take some questions and I'll give it back to our wonderful panelists who made me lose all sense of time and space, for that matter, to offer concluding remarks. Yes, please. Please introduce yourself briefly and then ask the question. And don't give a speech, I beg of you. Thank you.
You might want to turn your mic on. conversation on this for a whole winter afternoon and evening, you know?
We can even do that in Shimla. We can have a new
Definitely.
series called Conversation.
Definitely.
Fireside.
Hi, my name is Roshni. So, one thought and one food for thought which we all really need to ponder upon is, as was very rightly mentioned, is that inner evolution is very important for our society.
Inner revolution, outer evolution. That was the formula I offered.
Right, right.
Because if you say inner evolution, it's not wrong.
It
But
has to translate
it,
into.
it must be so radical that
It manifests in society.
yes, for it to matter. If it's very, very slow, it's all right, but it should be a series of radical shifts.
Right.
Okay.
So, this is my personal observation, and I think this is not just happening in India. I understand that this is happening in the West as well. There are people who call it as postmodernism or cultural Marxism, so to say, wherein, society is, wherein nihilism has become a very, trendy thing, as if there is just nothing to anything kind of a thing. And, that is something which is seeping into popular culture, into the narrative. And the grip on the narrative is unfortunately shaped by, a certain section of people who have their own, ideas, so to say. So probably, that is starting in India as well. I mean, yeah, it always was, but it's becoming more and more pronounced. So one thing is that.
Can you ask a question, please,
Yes,
Roshni?
yeah. So the question is that how do we, bring about this right from school-going days?
Okay.
You know?
Thank you. Thank you. One sec. Let me
Yeah.
see if Shaunak has something to say about this. Go ahead, go ahead.
You've again asked a musician difficult sociological question. I think I would wait for you to react and then think what is a good answer.
But I thought you would say, expose children to music and,
Yeah.
and let everybody learn music or painting or the arts, and that's a very good way to connect with your deeper self, rather than just through the mind. You see, we've become over cerebral today, and some of the problems you talk about, the loss of meaning, anomie, right, the atrophy of values, nihilism, that has to do with this over intellectualization of our lives and the split in our personalities, But anyhow, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, well, you're absolutely right. I mean, one of the fundamental things that doesn't exist in India, of course, which exists, of course, in Europe, in Britain, of course, and in America, is the teaching of the classical texts and classical languages. This classical education, the idea of a classical education, is entirely lost in India. And the reason why it's lost in India is because children are taught Sanskrit. It's as simple as that. If you go to Britain, for instance, where I now live, one of the greatest debates in their public sphere, so to speak, is how much more can they do to expand their teaching of the classics. And you have excellent scholars, and many of them, Makarand would know, people like Mary Beard at Cambridge, people like Peter Frankopan at Worcester College at Oxford, and so on and so forth, who are consistently, Lewin Morgan at Brasenose College, constantly working to make the classical alive today. If you read, for instance, Mary Beard's books on Rome and on Greece, it's all brought alive to today. You don't feel that, the poetry of Sappho, because you're a woman, I'm talking about, Sappho, you don't think, the poetry of Sappho is very far away from you. You feel that it lives in you today. But we have failed to do that. And that's because fundamentally, this awful bias, this terrible, petty, I don't know, I mean, I can't use stronger words than that because I'm sitting on a stage, bias against teaching people Sanskrit. It's completely ridiculous.
In fact, Hindol, speaking of that, it is British school, St. James's School, which has pioneered teaching Sanskrit at a very young age to all its students. And Paul Palmarosa was here the other day and was telling us about the experiments. And just chanting, if you learn how to chant, even if you don't understand what it is, it has an effect, you see, the vibration. But then that is very Brahmanical, so it's going to be shot down, you know. But the fact is, you can learn things in your own language. You can learn Divya Prabandhams in Tamil, you can learn Padavalis in Bengali, you can learn Rabindra Sangeet. But just chanting a pre-modern text is going to do something to you, for sure. You want to say something? Then we'll take another question.
But definitely, I completely agree with both of you. But another challenge is the so-called onslaught of so-called popular and Bollywood music and populist music, maybe, and populist art forms, which have, to a great extent, displaced traditional and classical art forms. Most people of my generation have no idea exactly by what they understand by the word classical music. Whether classical music is a correct connotation, whether it's a correct term or not, that's another debate. But classical गाना बजाना है क्या एक हिंदुस्तानी या कर्नाटकी, तो people have a complete disconnect, and there is no institutional or very less institutional attempt also to inculcate such thoughts and those seeds in the minds of the youngsters. They are hardly taught so in schools. They hardly get the opportunity to come, to come face to face with these kind of art forms.
Absolutely. In fact, we can have this Shastriya Sangeet of whichever kind you want, Indian or Western, as a component in our curriculum, because this is the thread of classicism that's running through this answer to you, Roshni. But we can take another couple of questions. Professor Desi Raju, I see a hand here, then you. 1 second, I saw his hand there first. Sorry, Kiranji. It's my eyesight which is flawed, you know.
You've spoken about
Not my heart.
You've spoken about three giants from Bengal, and inevitably the discussion went into Bengaliness. So Makarand, you said something about the innocence of Bengali culture, and I think Hindol, you spoke about the newness of it. I will ask a question to the historian. Given these two factors or any other factor, could you rationalize why the British made their easiest entry into India in Bengal? Or compared to, say, well, Madras and Bombay were also somewhat easy, but is there any region-specific reason as to why the ingress was easiest here in Bengal?
But was it easiest in Bengal? I think we battled hard. Now, we lost, that's a different thing. But yes, I think there is argument to be made, and I think, Professor Desi Raju, you're right, that once we lost, or once the official or formal battles were lost, the cultural, invasion in a sense was rather rapid. I completely agree on that. But remember, there were 2 or 3 reasons for that. Like I said, the Bengali culture, the contemporary Bengali culture of that time was particularly ripe for an acceptance or embrace of what it saw to be modern. That was a very important thing. The fascination with modernity is also, and that fascination with modernity, remember, had its good things also. Because if you remember Swami Vivekananda in Boston saying that, I traveled around the world and I saw Oxford and Cambridge would not allow their, women to study and give them degrees, whereas my university, Calcutta University, was giving women degrees and, letting them into the university and getting them to study long before Western universities. So there was a positive side to that also, but the negative, so to speak, which is what you're referring to, is this idea, this fascination for that which is modern, and that is one of the critical.
This is such a profound point, but going back to what you were saying for just 1 second, see, the British first tried Western India, as you know, because they inherited these, or rather got them in dowry, the islands of Bombay, when Catherine of Braganza was given in marriage. But the Marathas were very strong there, so they couldn't go very far. And if you look at new accounts of why the British defeated the Marathas, it starts with their destroying the ports, you see, and Cuttack was a Maratha port, and it was captured. And you see, don't forget that Clive went to Bengal from the south, from Madras. After the siege of Arcot, Clive went from south to the north, to Bengal. And Bengal was a priority because it was India's richest province. So they had the maximum revenue from there. And finally, the Bengali Hindus, I shouldn't be saying this, I'll be very unpopular for saying it, but the Bengali Hindus saw the British as saviors from the oppression of the Nawabs of Murshidabad, you see. So it was a very complex scenario, but as I said, embourgeoisement, and that also resulted in the rejection of the native culture, which the Bengali Bhadraloks did, and then they recovered it. And they also found the link to ancient India, for which I think we have to be very grateful. But I want to add a footnote that the thing called Bengal Renaissance had already happened in Tanjavur. If you go to Sarfoji's library, he was already exploring East and West and new ways of synthesizing them long before the Bengalis had caught on to it. Anyhow, Kiranji.
I'm just building on Desraju's point. Post-independence also, pre-independence we had the greatest nationalists, the three great nationalists that you talked about came from Bengal. But post-independence, prominent anti-nationalists also come from Bengal. Would you reconcile this?
Well, I don't want to go into the phraseology of, who's nationalist or who's anti-nationalist. However, let me say this. I think post-independence, and we will talk about this later this afternoon, we believe today that the Indian national movement constituted really of the ideology of non-violence propagated by Gandhiji, and that in a sense won us independence. Now, there may be a grain of truth to that, but it is certainly not the entire truth. I think there was an entire, landscape of revolution, so to speak, led by Marathis, of course, and the Bengalis. I was just saying in England to another audience that today people think that the Bengalis are all very cerebral and effeminate and so on and so forth. But by God, who were the ones throwing those bombs? It was us. Remember, it was the Bengalis who were throwing all these bombs. It was a Bengali who raised the first army, for crying out loud, and against the British. But that strain, in a sense, was, got swarmed by the official narrative, so to speak, of the Indian National Congress under Mahatma Gandhi.
In fact, I'll just add a footnote. It's fascinating how if you go to Andamans and you look at the list of people who went to jail there, who were transported, hanged, the maximum are Bengalis. And they're all middle-class people. So the paradox of Bengal is in 1857, they did not participate in the so-called Great Revolt, though it happened in Barakpur, which is in Bihar, in today's Bihar. And if you look at Bengali literature, there's hardly any celebration of 1857, as an anti-British uprising. And Rabindranath is very anti-revolutionary, by the way. He's very suspicious of people seizing power. If you look at all his, Sandeep in Ghare Baire, if you look at Gora in Gora, if you look at Char Adhyay, the so-called revolutionary characters are seen with a very distrustful eye. And yet, as he said, among the bomb throwers, it's Bengalis, Punjabis, and Maharashtrians who dominate the lists of the so-called terrorists against the British Empire. Now your subsequent question is more interesting in some ways, because how is it that, it has to do with Maoism, let me put it that way, and communism, both of which, found a very fertile ground in Bengal. And that's because of a disgruntled middle class, which was weaned away from nationalist causes. And this was done in a very careful way. If you talk to Sanjeev Sanyal, he's researching on this. There was, by no means it was an innocent thing. It was very properly and strategically planned. So those on the other side who are interested should also take it into account. We have two more hands. And
I just want to add one line to that. But it's the breaking, and since, Hari, you're an entrepreneur, you will understand this. The middle class disenchantment that he's talking about came from the fact that the entrepreneurial base was completely destroyed. There were no jobs. Think about Calcutta of that time is a bit like, the people marching into Paris today against oil rises. And there was, and of course, those people are far more prosperous, but Bengal, I mean, all of the works of Ritwik Ghatak or Satyajit Ray, I mean, we used to laugh about this as children. Everybody is always mostly without a job there and perpetually looking for a job. You look at these films like Mohanagor and all of that, this perpetual desire for a job that nobody seems to be able to attain, and the desperation for that job, and this constant battle to get this job. That was the theme of Bengal. That entrepreneurial desperation that we just don't have means to a livelihood broke the back of an entire generation, which then obviously those people were, great fodder for a particular ideology, and they could be told that the only way this could change was to completely overthrow the state.
Absolutely. I remember the scene in Jana Aranya where this very brilliant young guy, he's written an exam answer, and it goes to this examiner who's got 100,000 answers. He can't see properly, the lights go off, and in that old, what is it called, that lantern, hurricane lantern, not even hurricane, kerosene lantern, and he's just like arbitrarily giving marks, and then this guy gets a 3rd division, no job, And the point is, the capital, not only shifted to India, but shifted from the British to the Marwadis and Gujaratis. So the Bengali Bhadraloks who felt, disinherited by the British Empire and orphaned, because they were disenfranchised of capital of that sense, So anyhow, three very quick questions, then we're winding up. Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Hi, my name is Kunal. I'm happy to say that I'm a Bengali entrepreneur. Though I've been away from Bengal for about 10 years now. My education started there, but I moved outside and then...
Best thing to do if you're Bengali from Bengal is to leave it. The moment you leave it, you become successful.
Yeah, but my question, brings back to that you mentioned that at some point most of the Bengalis, they want to find their way back, and probably you have found your way back through the book that you have written, and you have mentioned that your mother was worried at some time that you're losing your way in terms of Vivekananda, and then he said, what better way than writing a book? So my question is simple to Shaunakda and Hindol both, is that what are the 3 tips that you're going to give to the young Bengalis who are outside to find their way back to Bengal?
Okay,
Thank you.
But 1 second, we'll just take the 3 questions. Thank you so much. Next, you. And the last question to the lady in red.
Good morning. This is Vinayak Pandey. See, just picking the thread from this, this cultural invasion happened throughout India, in particular Bengal, and to some extent attributable to this fascination to so-called modernity. If you look at the Western society, what is coming back to us through, because we are just following them there in the circle, and after having this over-obsession with tarka, intellect, and then realizing the limitation of that, and coming back to that anubhuti part, which is very much our own indigenous concept since ages. And while the West, we can see...
Question, what is your question?
Yeah. So what we are doing to really repackage those things.
Okay,
that
thank you.
Fascination cannot happen unless we repackage it for our young children in our own ways.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Vinayakji. Yes, ma'am. Last question.
Good morning. My name is Bhashruti, and I'm also looking for your advice on the way forward for those of us who are Bengali and thus polymaths. Most of us who are considered unusual are polymaths because we're both good in art, sciences, and music, and we don't want to deny our culture.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we are looking for a way back and also a way forward, and we'll start with you, Shauna.
Come and join my music
back
class.
To Bengal and a way forward from Bengal.
Yeah, I just said come and join my music class. That's one good way to do it. Anyway, jokes apart. I think as a generation, our generation has a lot of responsibility in this regard. We ourselves need to be proud of what Bengaliness is, what our ethos is rather. And we need to pass on the information, pass on the tradition to the next generation. And that necessarily does not only mean music or a poetry in isolation, that includes the whole of it, our history, etc. if we are not confident, if we are not proud of what we are, then there's no question of instilling that pride in our friends, in the minds of our friends or our next generation. So I think that's the first thing which we need to do, conscious of our identity.
Thank you, Shauna.
But I think to me the answer is very simple. I mean, all the work that I do is basically about this. I think we need to take our tradition and make it alive today. Even my book on Swami Vivekananda, which Makarandji was kind enough to read, it talks about what Vivekananda means today, not just the fact that here was this man 100 years ago, frozen in stone, and he said a few things, and now we can put him as posters in our houses. That doesn't really mean anything. The relevance to things today is very important. And I think we have a great task ahead to bring all of this alive into our daily lives. And some of us are trying. In fact, all three of us on stage are trying in our own ways to bring it all alive. We seek an audience, and the audience is not just an inanimate audience who will just absorb what we are trying to do, but an audience which will also reconnect and build their own material consistently and spread it as much as they can.
Thank
The
you.
lady's not happy with that.
No,
Can I take 30 seconds from you
Yeah,
just?
please, please. You hardly spoke. Go ahead.
Okay, no, I'll not speak. I'll just sing one line of a Rabindra Sangeet, followed by an English translation done by me. It's a very bad translation, but that's what I can do. জগত জুড়ে উদার সুরে আনন্দ গান বাজে সে গান কবে গভীর রবে বাজিবে হিয়া মাঝে. The world resounds with beautiful sounds and joyous music posing. When will the music touch my heart? And when will my heart start singing? The world resounds with beautiful sounds and joyous music posing. This could be just one way of carrying it.
Thank
Beyond
you so
Bengal.
much. Wonderful. Well, our time's up. I just wanted to say we had two wonderful. There's a coincidence that we have both Roshni and Bhashwati in the audience, which really gives us a clue that we have to make everything Prakashwan, filled with light, because that is what Bharat does. It throws light on things and also fills them with light. And that links up with Vinayakji's question about Anubhuti, because I think there are a lot of smart people today who can take care of the packaging, but you'll have to take care of the Anubhuti yourself. So I think the way we can regain our lost selves is to practice ourselves. Each one of us must do sadhana and experience for ourselves what that higher truth that our civilization stands for talks about. And it's pointless worrying about how to preach and propagate it or even propagandize it if we've not experienced it ourselves. And I only want to say this one last thing in the end, that parochial as Bengalis may be, whenever they like somebody, they make him an honorary Bengali. So I hope that that honor is bestowed on me. I consider myself a great Bangla file. Thank you
You're
so
an honorary
much.
Bengali.
Thank you so
Definitely.
much. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you.
Kojo, Kojo.